If I tell you that a movie is able to amass 121 million US dollars box office worldwide with no marketing budget, you wouldn't believe me. Here, I'm talking about Hayao Miyazaki's newest movie, The Boy and the Heron, or in Japanese, How Do You Live? Despite his last work a decade ago, his influence is still impeccable to this day. The film, in my opinion, is one of the strongest from Miyazaki, on par of, if not surpass, Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle. Without further ado, let's talk about the story first. The story is about a boy named Mahito who lost his mother to World War II in a hospital fire. He later moved from Tokyo to the countryside estate and to live with his new mother, Natsuko, who happened to be his mother's sister. Feeling complexed, the 12-year-old was indifferent to the affection of Natsuko. Since his mother's tragic death, Mahito is haunted by the fact that his mother died in a fire, and he would dream about her calling his name and asked him for help. This is picked up by the gray heron, who is nosy about all the things in his estate, and it would grab Mahito's attention by flying nearby him and to spy on him. One time after Mahito tried to escape from school by hitting his head with a rock, the heron mimicked Mahito's mother's voice, screaming for help in a gnarly, ugly voice, so as to lure Mahito to follow him. That is when Mahito decided to stand up to the bird. He made a bow and arrow made of the bird's feather, ready to be used against it. One evening, Natsuko went missing, and Mahito let the heron lead him to the derelict tower, where his granduncle is said to vanish within. In search of Natsuko, Mahito has to explore in a parallel world and to find all the solutions himself. For those who have finished watching the film, I guess your first reaction at the end of the credit listening to Kenshi Yonensu's beautiful song would be, wow, there's just so much that I can't really comprehend and I need a good minute to wrap my head around it. For me, I really need to watch it for the second time so as to get a better understanding about it, with a lot of deliberation with my friends watching the film with me. The story is pretty much like Spirited Away, about self-discovery, but heavy on the grief, and ended with a weird trip, if you know what I mean. For me, the story is divided into two parts, before and after Mahito enters the tower, and I'm going to talk about it accordingly, and here is my personal take. Part 1. Mahito's growth. At the beginning of the story, we know that Mahito was forced into different scenarios in life. He grew up in the middle of a war, his mother lost her life because of a bomb, he was forced to adapt to a new environment, new school, and to a new mother. As far as we know, Mahito was alone in those difficult times. Being his immediate family, his father became too occupied due to the war because he made so much money manufacturing aircrafts, and he was definitely not there for Mahito. Also, Mahito was the new kid in school and he didn't have friends during that time. He had a hard time trying to overcome the grief of losing his mother and adapting to the changes all by himself. As a result, Mahito was self-destructive. So destructive that Kiriko, the younger version of one of his grannies, whom he met in a parallel world, said he was smelled of death during the first encounter. Mahito didn't like what had happened to him, and we could tell that he didn't know how to cope with all these. The way he picked a fight at school, he proceeded to hit his head with a rock, and he also lied about it. These can all be interpreted as escaping from school and reality. I also interpret these behaviors as him having too much grief that he didn't know how to release them, so he had to take it out on himself. That also explains why, when Mahito would have delusion about his mother, she would be screaming, "Mahito, help me!" He was directing all the pain to himself by self-mutilation and self-blaming. It is only after he discovered the book left by his real mother that he started to change. The book, you guessed it, is the name of the film How Do You Live, or in Japanese, 君たちはどう生きるか? When he was reading the book, he was able to internalize the content with his life experience. It was shown on the film that he was not actually reading from the text, but reading his own story. I caught it during my third time watching the film. There are Japanese characters mentioning of the entrance, flying, car, and these elements are what he encountered during his first arrival at the estate. Only after him reading the book, he made up his mind on making amend about his relationship with Natsuko by deliberately going into the woods to the trap set up by the heron. This is a character development for Mahito, as initially he was being indifferent to the new mother. Before, when Natsuko had morning sickness and asked him to visit her for multiple times, Mahito reluctantly did so, and in a very brief manner. From here, we can already tell that before entering the parallel world, Mahito has started to change. He has changed his attitude in life under his mother's influence over him through a book. In addition, without the context of the book, we, as the international audience, cannot relate to Mahito as much as the Japanese people. This book is so popular in Japan that it is the textbook material for all the kids in Japan to read. They could relate to how reading this book could be life-changing. As international audience, all we need to know for the moment is that this book has a positive effect on Mahito, and the content of the book has nothing to do with the rest of the film. But I do highly recommend you to read it after the film. Perhaps you could relate to Mahito in a deeper manner. Part 2. Parallel World / The Tower. In the first part, there is already the big character arc for Mahito. In the second part, of course, it is about how Mahito is going to rescue Natsuko. But the parallel world is just so crazy and not everything is according to logics. I'm going to pop the question. Is it real? I think it could be real or it could be not. It could be real like Spirited Away, that he's just like Chihiro who saved her parent and Haku the dragon with hard work and a genuine heart. Or it could be all imagined by Mahito. After all, he suffered from head injuries, and it was only after Mahito has hit himself in the head that the heron started talking. I think Mahito has suffered from dramatic changes in life and perhaps trauma, that he has to imagine a fantasy for himself so as to accept what had happened to him. Imagine losing your mother to a fire. It was so brutal that Mahito couldn't even see his mother's remain after her death. This news must be beyond bearable for anyone, let alone a kid. That is why he has to imagine another world where his mother is Himi, a fire spirit, who lives freely and lively and keeps the order of the other world using her fire magic. She has to meet him in person in this other world and to choose to decide to become his mother with all the understanding of what will happen to her if she chooses the path of becoming his mother. That is how Mahito copes with his loss and grief about his mother's death. She won't be suffering much later in a fire, for she is the fire spirit. Also, it is his way of coping with the fact that his new mother is his mother's sister. He has to imagine the world where his mother knew about all this love affair and she is equally excited about the baby on the way so that he could face his new family without holding back in the future. Miyazaki's autobiography. As many knows, this film is a semi-autobiographical piece by Miyazaki. This film is yet another film for Miyazaki to retire from for the fourth time after Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, The Wind Rises, and now The Boy and the Heron. I reckon that Miyazaki has still a lot of things he wants to tell us through his work in this scale. He has inserted a lot of metaphors in the second part, too much that I can't say that I get them all because I believe that everybody's take from the film will be different in context to their individual experiences, but here are my takeaways. Miyazaki has basically written himself into two characters, Mahito and the grand-uncle. There are a lot of implications and I will show a few here. Mahito shares a lot of similarities with Miyazaki. Both of them grew up during World War II. Miyazaki also lost his mother in a hospital, but she died of tuberculosis. And many of you may know about Miyazaki's complicated relationship with planes because his father manufactured planes during war just like Mahito's father. Miyazaki grew up watching military aircrafts and he's fascinated by them, but at the same time he's very anti-war. Miyazaki is also the grand-uncle. The grand-uncle established the tower from the boulder and created the parallel world isolated from the reality where wars and other ill intentions exist. Ghibli Studio is an animation empire founded by Miyazaki. Being the brain of the studio, Miyazaki makes art with hopes and pure intentions, and people consume his arts to escape from reality. In the parallel world, the uncle is looking for an heir. That is why Natsuko is lured into the world with her unborn baby at the first place, but he is unable to find one to replace him. Just like the grand-uncle, Miyazaki couldn't locate a person to take over him entirely, for nobody is Miyazaki. The grand-uncle has gathered all 13 building blocks and tried to pass them down to Mahito. The 13 building blocks represents all Miyazaki's animation works in his entire career. He is trying to pass his will to us through his work. The Castle of Cagliostro, NAUSICAÄ of the Valley of the Wind, Castle in the Sky, My Neighbor Totoro, KIKI'S Delivery Service, PORCO ROSSO, Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, Ponyo, The Wind Rises, The Boy and the Heron, and the one that is often overlooked, Future Boy Conan, where Mahito shared the blueprint of the protagonist. I think what Miyazaki means here is that he has tried his bestest to build us this world filled with hopes and dreams with his works, and he now passes them to us. And if you look closely, there are a lot of derivatives from his past work and gives you that deja vu in the film. Like when Mahito is ducking in the bushes in search of Natsuko, it resembles when Mei from My Neighbor Totoro following mini Totoros. The residence in the other world is like those living in Spirited Away. The way the boy and the heron is paying tribute to all of his previous works gives me all the goosebumps and chills. Differences in the name and the marketing in different places. To talk about something not related to the story, I'm going to talk about the translation of the name and the marketing that sets the tone and expectations differently in different places. The name is originally called How Do You Live? The title is straight out of a question and it forces you to look inside of you to find the answers. If you go into the movie theater with that question, then I think you expect the right thing from the film, because the film does require you to look inside of yourselves while using your experiences to try to relate to the main character as much as you can so that you can get the best out of the film. Meanwhile, there are some other one-line marketing descriptions like a mesmerizing and colorful adventure to market a film. That sound too fun and exciting, and it's like what you're going to watch is a carefree adventure, something you expect from Howl's Moving Castle and Ponyo. I'm not trying to shade other works, but I'm just saying The Boy and the Heron requires more mental energy and it is just not the chillax film that you watch while having popcorns. It is also the type of film where you need to watch it again and again so that you get more from the plot and the metaphors. Also, I would highly recommend you to watch it at least 2 times for different cinematic experiences. There are also translations like The Heron and the Boy, like in Hong Kong and also in Taiwan. I think I have a bigger bone to pick with this translation, as this has put the emphasis on the heron. It is true that a lot of suspense has been set up for the heron at the beginning of the film, but later we would find out that the heron is just a guide to the parallel world and perhaps one of the many friends that Mahito made throughout the journey. The Heron and the Boy is just making the heron more important than Mahito, and hence set the expectation wrong. I would much prefer The Boy and the Heron as it is going to help me understand that I'm going to experience all these in the POV of Mahito. Conclusion. I remember watching for the first time that I was so into the plots and what's going on next, so I missed a lot of Easter eggs and the music scores. For the second time, I was more lean back and enjoyed the music scores for the tension build-ups. For the third time, I brought the questions from my analysis and the theory and tried to read into every character's facial expression, little details, and Easter eggs. That constitutes to the birth of this very first video essay of mine. I believe the death of the author is made intentional, that even Miyazaki doesn't have the reason behind every frame. This is also another beauty of the film, and I really would like to know about your own takeaway. In the press, it is said that Miyazaki has not retired yet, but I do think this is his final work to this scale. I am simply grateful to be born into the same era when he is making art.